and it's recording.
Okay.
And hang on one second, I'll give you.
You have the first
make
page.
Sure,
you have the page with the first questions.
Yeah, make sure don't move it too much so I don't shake, and like keep those numbers on top of her head.
Yeah, I got it.
And that's it. And sound good.
Hello?
Make sure if you don't hear her, because I'm having problem with that mic.
I
If you
hear her
don't,
now.
yeah, if you don't hear her, just let me know as soon as possible. So
Oh, I'm with my hair out of the way.
All right. Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Amanda. Thank you so much for coming to be interviewed for the Names Not Numbers project.
You're welcome.
Please state your name.
Carla Biba.
When and where were you born?
When? I was born the night on New Year's Eve between 1940 and 1941. And, but they made my birthday January 2nd because the office of municipal building was closed on January 1st. They couldn't find the log. So it says, oh, we'll put a January 2nd. We'll give them a day of use. So my official birthday became January 2nd, 1941.
How did that make you feel that they changed your identity?
It doesn't change my identity. My mom always told me, you were born on New Year's Eve on a snowstorm, and that was it. 2 minutes after midnight.
Can you describe what the community was like before the war when you were young?
Well, before the war, I can't describe it because I wasn't born. But I can tell you what it was because my family talk. The Jews in Italy lived a genteel life. I have relatives, they were famous in their field. It's a very different community from the ones that lived in Eastern Europe. Mario Cavalieri is a famous painter that was related to my family. I'm related to a famous Nobel Prize, Rita Levi Montalcini, who discovered growth factor in peripheral nervous system. There were a lot of people at the university. It was a wealthy community. As I said, they lived a genteel life. The war did not change much after they came back, but of course everybody tried to disappear. The first racial laws were in 1939. That was the first racial laws. Mussolini, as you know, was the dictator of Italy, decided that Jews could not go to university, Jews could not get married, Jews could not have maids. So what happened was that the country was flooded with false paper. The maids became our cousins. The Jews got married in San Marino, which is a little republic in the midst of Italy. So they managed to survive, and they kept their lives, although sometimes under fear. Mm-hmm. This was the life before the war. Then, of course, the war came.
Yeah. Can you describe your actual family, like their?
My actual family?
Yeah. Any jobs of theirs?
Well, my father was an attorney who spoke 7 languages. Yes, he was. My grandfather had a business of coffee import. They were wealthy. They lived, as I said, a very good life. I remember seeing the house 3 floors with the dining room table was from here to here, and I remember my grandparents sitting at the 2 head of the table and the servant running from one place to the other, and me sitting in the center. This was my grandfather's side. My grandmother had 5 children. The last 2 were twins. My mother's family lived in Ferrara. So my father's family lived in Ancona. My mother's family lived in Ferrara, which is an ancient Jewish town. There is the oldest mikvah in Europe. It's right in Ferrara. My mother was born in 1901, so we're talking about many years ago. But it was, again, she went to private school, private education. as I said, they lived very comfortably, as I said, until the war came along. But even during the war, there was fear, but the Jews didn't really have fear for their lives until 1943. The war was 1940, until when the Nazi invaded the country.
Do you remember that actual day of when Nazis invaded?
Well, yeah, I know the day. Not that I remember. I was 2.5 years old. Yeah, it was the night between 24th of July and 25th. When you see, there was the people that had taken over were dealing with Americans for the fascists to fall down. The armistice wasn't signed until September 8th, but that night, about 6 or 7 Panzer Division invaded the country. That's when my mother and I escaped, because that became very dangerous. The Germans were all over the country, and they were killing people right and left.
What were the anti-Semitism that they experienced?
Personally,
Yeah.
I didn't experience much anti-Semitism. The war was, the Italians are a bunch of funny people. They are not very, they don't believe in the government. As you follow the paper, they can't hold the government more than a week. You know, eating and going to the beach and love and songs are much more important to the Italians than the politician. They don't believe it. So there was not really anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm.
It's different now.
Did your family have any interactions with non-Jews?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Friendships? Can you
Oh,
explain that?
yes. The Jews in Italy live their lives in their own home, but when they're outside in the war, they're almost undistinguishable for the way they live. Mostly it's a conservative community. Now we have more of Orthodox, but mostly it's a conservative community. Although the temple had been built so many years ago, they still have the women upstairs and the men downstairs. But they, for instance, in Rome, the Jews own mostly the business, clothes, jewelry, leather, and that's very good for me when I go shopping. There was not this, I don't know how I can say, as a matter of fact, they were fascists, make no mistake about it, but there was a minority. The official church didn't help much, because Pope was Pio, whatever his name was, I can't remember.
Pius XII.
Pius XII, he didn't help much. But they were at the lower level. There's a famous book, The Assisi Underground. Priest and nun, just the common people. There was a lot of help. My own cousin went in hiding into a nunnery, and she was walking out dressed like a nun. As a matter of fact, it's a funny story. She lived in Rome in this nunnery, and she met her fiancé, who became her husband. He recently died after 65 years of marriage. And she forgot she was dressed like a nun, and so she went ahead and hugged him. And there was a little old man sitting in a bench, and he says, "The nun too, there is no more God," he said. So there was help. There were tons of false paper, false names. So the Italians, by and large, helped. I don't think it's the same now, but in those days, we stayed in Italy until 1943, my mother and I.
How did you feel the day that your father was taken away?
How did I feel? Later on, when I was growing up, my mother and I escaped to Switzerland, to a part of Switzerland that it's the French canton of Switzerland. my father escaped somehow. He was left for dead in Germany. He knew the underground. Eh?
Oh, never mind.
Well, my father was in Auschwitz, and then he was transported to Germany. Don't ask me why. I was 2. I have no idea what was going on. But what happened was that he was able to, through the underground, because he knew these people, to find us in Switzerland. This was 1944, so I was 3 years old. And I do remember when he came in.
Can you explain the feeling?
I do remember certain feelings you don't forget. I do remember that my father entered the door, and my mother must have been cooking something because she dropped the pot. So the shock was to see him. And I remember, I don't know if you can believe it, but I can still see my parents hugging, and I remember me pulling their clothes like, hey, I'm here too. It lasted about a year. My mother said he had never seen that man in bed, sick, but of course, a year in concentration camp did a job on his health. And so he died in Switzerland. And then we came back when we thought, when the American Sixth Army liberated Rome, we thought that they had come up north, but they didn't. So we came back to Italy. And I do remember all my life having this, you say how I felt. When I was 19, I had vowed that I would never set foot in Germany. That's it. I can't forgive him, I can't. Then when I was 19, I was in political science in those days, and then I moved to biology. I won a scholarship that was run by NATO to go and study in the south of Germany, near Munich, in the Schwarzwald. And I got there were a few hundred applicants and 25 seats, and I got the scholarship. So I got the letter. I was 19 and arrogant, you know, when you're 19. And I threw the letter away, and I said to my mother, okay, I proved I could do it. I'm not going to Germany. And my mother said, they're dead, you're alive. Go and show what you have. And I went, and you asked me how I felt. When I crossed that border and I heard that voice, Achtung, Achtung, I had something here. I hated him. To this day, I cannot stand the sound of their voices. Ask me why. Because I remember hiding in a train in the bathroom, and my mother going, and I hear their voices saying, Papieren, Papieren. I hate their voices. I mean, recently I was in Rome in a cafe with my cousin, and there were tourists sitting there speaking in German. And I said to my cousin, can we move to another table? I can't stand the sound of their voices. She was born after the war, so she didn't have the feelings that I have. Those feelings really never die in you.
How did you go to Switzerland?
My mother paid with diamonds. How the Jews ever paid for their freedom?
Diamonds?
My mother had diamonds. She had a beautiful ring and earrings. As a matter of fact, she put them all in a sack, took them out of the ring before, and she paid for a truck. You're young, but you probably have heard that Jews pay with diamonds all their lives. And whenever things get dangerous, the Jews in South Africa left by paying diamond, even recent history. So my mother had a little satchel of diamond that she gave to this guy that this was 1943, I was 2.5 years old. And the guy didn't keep the satchel, took the diamonds, and my mother got back the satchel, put it in her pockets. When we got to Switzerland, there was one diamond left, a yellow diamond. Later on, my mother says, it's yours. And all these years, I about 5 years ago, I decided, I kept it in the safety deposit box. I decided it was time to wear it. And I made a beautiful necklace. And it's still here with me.
Wow.
They forgot, they didn't see it.
Why were you on the train when your mother told you to be silent, you said before?
Because whenever we had to go from one place to another, in Italy you took the train, and the Germans,
What was happening at that time?
Germans were everywhere, and they checked the paper because they wanted to, because Jews had cards that gave the religion. It said Hebrew on it, it said in Italian, it said Hebraic, but we had folksy name. My mother never changed her name. She said she was born this way, she wasn't going to change. They were Jews that baptized themselves for fear of being taken. And Hitler said, be careful to the converted one. So it didn't help much. Yes.
So, wait, oh, so you never had false papers?
My mother didn't. My family had a lot of false paper. They still have them. They kept them
Why do
there.
you think they still keep them?
Oh, because you don't want to forget. Churchill said, those who forget history, they're going to do it again. And my family kept it. I had such stupid names that they had. My cousin's father was a very important man in the government before the racial law. So, but they had friends. They gave all of this false paper.
It's the friends who helped them get the false papers?
Right.
So do you feel that, so the friends still remain loyal?
Well, yes, some of those friends are no longer with us because my cousin now is 90, was her father that had the paper. You know, you have to understand that the war was over 1945. Do you know how many years ago? A long time ago.
What happened to the rest of your father's family?
They escaped to South America, and my father today would be 112, and his brothers and sister would be over 100. Unfortunately, I lost touch with the children of it because they escaped to Argentina, and my grandparents died, of course, and I don't have any family on my father's side.
And on your mother's side?
Except for the one that are gone, I have family, we're very close. They live in Rome, most of them. Some live in Bologna. And I see them at least twice a year.
Were you ever put it... Okay. This one.
This is where we are, mother's family.
Yeah.
It's in the middle of answering my question. How far were we over till we went to the Minnesota Brockton?
Who's next?
Who's on camera?
Go back to,
Alright, make sure
she's
you
just in the middle of answering this question.
right on
I'll
top
let
of
her
her
answer
head.
it.
This is, she moves, you can move
On the exterior, so it's
one
not rubbing.
to the side, the other one's up and down. So make sure you keep
Which
those
one's
two.
up?
Test it, so that she can tell you
This is
whether
on the
she hears.
side and this one.
Up and down, the top of it, up and down, the other one.
Just keep this number on top of her head.
I have numbers on top of my head.
Like from the camera.
Yeah, I know, I know.
Alright?
Okay.
Just try to move it.
You can clear up some of this clutter.
So you're describing your mother's family?
Mm-hmm. My mother's family comes from Ferrara. Their maiden name was Bonfiglioli, which means good children. Their original name was Bentovim, which if you understand Hebrew, you know what it means. Jews did not have last name in Italy until the Middle Ages. They had city names in Italy, and when they are compelled to have last name, they often translated, like my mother's family, they translated from Bentovin, became Bonfiglioli, which in Italian means good children, same thing. And They lived in Ferrara. They had, my grandfather was a rabbi, and his wife died of puerper infection, having the first child, which is an infection. You know, in those days, women die giving birth because we didn't have antibiotics. And then he married a distant cousin, and he had 2 more children, one of which was my mother. So they were talking about, my mother was born in 1901, and she was the youngest one. As I said, I was born 1941, so if you can do the math, I'm 71 years old. It's a long time ago. She had 4 brothers and a sister. They're all gone. But my mother's family mostly was the one that surrounded me when we came back from the war. They resumed their lives, back to the university, back to their business. They resumed their lives. And well, we lived in the north, which helped, because the country, the northern part of the country, through the Marshall Plan, was completely reconstructed. And I remember, however, when I first went to school, and I was 5 years old, in 1945, I was 4 and a half. In those days, they did things like that. They said, put her in first grade, the kid is bright. I was 4 and a half years old, everybody else was 6. But they sent me to, the temple was destroyed. Shall I stop?
It's okay, you got it.
The temple had been bombed, destroyed. So they were reconstructing. For 1 year, there was a nunnery school that offered to take the kids to school while they were reconstructing this yeshiva. It was a conservative yeshiva, I do remember. And so my mother took me there. I remember with horror that year. I do remember the evil nuns. They were really bad. But it only stayed for 1 year. And then the school reopened, and I went there in 2nd grade. And that was my mother's family who really helped the reconstruction. They were, as I said, I have uncles and aunts. They really surrounded me. In spite of all, I had a happy childhood after the war. It was, everybody seemed to rejoice to be alive, I guess. And yes.
Sorry. So after the war, life pretty much resumed to
it
was?
Pretty much. When my aunt came back from hiding, she found in the house, she found the garbage that she had left. She forgot to take the garbage out. It was still there. Life resumed, as I said. And I would have to say that things in Italy have changed recently. It has changed. But life resumed. I would have to say yes. We lived a normal life afterwards. We went to shul during the holiday. My mother made Purim cookies. As I said, life resumed normal afterwards. I left Italy in 1969. Well, because I had met my husband. I married a Jewish boy from Brooklyn. I mean, of all the... I met him when he was in Italy medical school. And I left Italy in 1969.
Is that why you decided to come to America?
No, I decided to come to America because I fell in love. In other words, I met my husband, I got engaged, and we got married here, well, not in Queens, in Brooklyn. So that's the reason why I left Italy, only because I got married. I followed the man I wanted to live with.
Just to backtrack for a few minutes, can you describe the day that you went to Switzerland?
Yes, I can, although I was 2.5 years old. You have a great faith in my long-term memory. Yeah, because there were one incident that remained very vivid in me. We crossed the border. I had a doll with me that the truck shut the lights to cross the border. You know, we crossed the border, and for some reason the doll fell and I lost the doll. Now, when I think of my kids now, if they had lost the doll when they were 2.5 years old, you could hear them screaming in Timbuktu, right? I didn't say anything. I felt the environment around me, I guess. Then when we got on the other side of Switzerland and put the light on, my mother saw that I was silently crying. I remember the name of the doll. The doll name was Gija. And my mother says, "What's happening?" And I said, "I lost Gija." And I was 2.5 years old, but I didn't scream. My mother said this child felt the fear surrounding her because we were crossing the border. They could have caught us. And if they caught us, I wouldn't be sitting here.
How did you cross the border? Was the truck illegal?
No, nothing was legal. Or what you did was an illegal truck that crossed the border through the Alps with the help of people in the government. They were helping getting people out of the border. It was all illegal. It was all under the ground. It was all underground. It was all under the table by paying and bribing. That's the only way we could do it. How did the Jews left Iran in modern history? What do? They bribe people, they pay, and they cross the border illegally.
Where did you go in Switzerland?
Near Lausanne. It was a little bungalow. The UJA in this country gave money to rescue the European Jews, and they built this bungalow in Switzerland. It was all American money that built those bungalows. And that's how we stay, in little bungalows. The language that we spoke in those days, besides Italian, it was French. That's how I learned French, because I was in this little bungalow. And with us, there was a young French Jewish woman who helped us as a nanny. And she escaped France. That's how we lived in the bungalow.
Can you describe the bungalow?
Mm-hmm. I still remember. It was a little bungalow. When you enter, they were cupboard. They were pale blue. I remember that it was one of those stoves, a Franklin stove, they call them. I still have a little scar here because there was upstairs, you went to the bedroom, and then I tumbled down the staircase because I was one of those kids. God gave me one the same. And I fell on the corner of the Franklin stove, and right here I have a tiny, tiny little scar. But I do remember the stove, I remember the table. I remember, right before we escaped to Switzerland, we lived in the countryside because we had lands that was ours, but we gave the deed to the farmers. So when the Nazi came, the farmer said, "We haven't seen him."
What did your mother do? Like, how did you get food? We saw, when my mother left, besides the diamond that she gave to the guy, she also sold jewelry. We got money from the underground, and the people that built that bungalow also helped to support the people that were there. There was help from, as a matter of fact, you say how we help food. First of all, we brought with us food from the countryside because that land was ours. But the farmer, after the war, they gave us back the deed. This is how it was. That's how I remember the food. My father arrived at this bungalow,
after he escaped from, after he was left for dead. And I do remember him in the
What did he
bunker.
say about Auschwitz?
Not much to me. Maybe to my mother. I mean, what can you say? I don't remember him saying anything. I remember him taking me out. There was an apple tree in the backyard. Believe it or not, he used to call me princess. I was spoiled when I was a child. And I remember he would lift me up to get the apple, and I would say, but I can't reach it. I still remember my father saying, you can reach anything you want, princess. And, but then he died in Switzerland because he had,
How had he changed now in Switzerland than before he was in?
of course, before I didn't know him. My father was taken at the border and my mother was pregnant. So my father tried to come back against his better judgment because he knew that my mother had given birth. And so he was taken at the border. So I never met my father until he came to Switzerland, and I lived with him for 1 year. Change, all I know is from my mother, who said he was the healthiest man he ever met. He never seen him in bed once. But here in concentration camp, did a job on his health. So when he came back, he was not a healthy man anymore, and he died there. How, again, I was 2.5 years old, and I lived.
Ever talked about what
He never. My mother talked very little about the concentration camp. I guess it was difficult for them to talk. Certainly, my father didn't talk to me about it, but I was a little girl. I mean, when he died, I was 3.5 years old, almost 4. So. He didn't talk too much about it.
In the brief biography that you gave, Reverend Meyer, you mentioned that your father was possibly experimented on in Auschwitz.
Yes.
Can you explain that?
My mother, when I was older, my mother mentioned the fact that he told her so. He had a brother and a sister. They were twins. He was not a twin, but he had a brother and a sister. They were twins. And Mengele, you know, the guy who experimented on twins, that was possibly the reason why he was very sick. He said that some surgery was done, some experiment was done on him because he had a brother and a sister with twins, which is a stupid thing because as a biologist now, I know they really had nothing to do. If you have 2 sisters or 2 brothers, they're twins, you have nothing to do. As a biology, I know now, and they were brother and sisters, so they were fraternal twins. So it's just 1 egg and 1 sperm, completely different. But
do you remember ever feeling without roots, like without a language or a country now when you were in Switzerland?
No, I was too young for that, and they didn't speak much Italian to me in those days, mostly French. Again, I was too young to have that kind of feelings about it. But I have to tell you that when I came back and they put me in school, I could not stand having my back to an open door. And I spoke French, and I would say to people, "Fermez la porte," which means close the door. My teacher said that by the spring I spoke fluent Italian. But I didn't speak Italian when I came back. I couldn't understand the language. But children pick up fast. So I don't remember feeling without a country. Again, I was too young. My mother felt that they had taken away her right to be in the country. I remember my mother saying that. And he says, I was born, my family was in Italy since the Crusade. And she felt that she had a right that had taken away from her. That I remember her saying that. But I was too young to have those feelings. And my family destroyed the family trees that they had. They were given noble title from the crown. You know that Italy was a monarchy. They destroyed it for fear of being found.
and I could never find it.
In all of your recollections about your father, there's a feeling of very deep love. What would you say to him now, if you could?
Oh, I still feel the love that I felt when he was there for 1 year. Yes, I do feel it. And I remember being in school, although, as I said, I had a happy childhood because I was surrounded by so many people. I do remember being envious of children that had their father. I remember waiting to be picked up and seeing kids. This is when I was 5 or 6 years old, 7, and father picking up kids. And I remember this feeling of having been just something that was taken away from me. And I knew why, and that is the point. I knew why I had lost it. That's my reason for never forgive the Germans, because I knew why. I was fully aware. I mean, I was a very precocious child when I was little. So much that my mother used to say, "Stop talking in front of the child. She picks up everything like a sponge." I knew why, and yes, I felt being deprived or something. And if I could see him again, you don't get a second chance in life like that. You don't, do you?
No. Can you describe the relationship you had with your mother?
I had a very close relationship. My mother was a very bright woman who was ahead of her time. I could talk about anything to her when I was a teenager. I remember being 13 at the beach. We had a beach, my family had a beach house. We used to go to the beach during the summer. And my mother, you know, you tell kids about the birds and the bees, you know what it means, right? In a very early age, because she said, "Don't tell me you didn't know about it." So she was very open. We had a very good relationship. I could tell her about anything. I wanted to learn English. So when I was 18, I applied to Cambridge and I needed a family. So my mother said, "Okay, you can go to England, but let me find a place for you." She had a friend that had a son that had escaped to England during the war. They were Jews, of course, and he had remained in England. So my mother contacted this friend, he contacted the son, and I went to live at West Cliff-on-Sea, which is a Jewish area, where this family accepted me, au pair. I didn't do anything, I just taught French and Italian to their son. And then every day they took me to London, which was an hour away. West Cliff-on-Sea is a suburb of London. So and then I would take the train and go to Cambridge. But I remember seeing girls that had to wash. They were au pair. Not me, because my mother had made sure that I had a right family. So yes, I had a very close relationship, but I lost her very young. When my mother died, I was 25 years old, 2 months before I got married. Too young.
We're just going to switch here.
Who's going to do camera now? Keep the numbers and talk. You don't have to press anything. I'm doing a close-up. You don't have to zoom in. Just keep it wide as possible.
Are you girls going to be filmmakers?
You see the numbers?
Sort of, yeah.
Yeah. You see the numbers right on top of her head? Don't keep it so much up and so much down. Just keep the head on top of her head, right? Like just as I'm keeping that right now. You're in a wide angle, so I need not for you.
Cindy told me that we have to get everything, the whole story, because she needs to see it on the
She
DVD.
needs to see it, right? You know, and then when my daughter gives orders, you know, you have to follow them.
I have a feeling it wasn't much different when you were a child in relation to your mother.
You know what? You're not wrong. You're not wrong. It's just a different generation. But it is. As a matter of fact, I mean, I often say that my older daughter is completely different. I mean, I love her to pieces, but she's completely different from me. My younger one, Danielle, is everything I was when I was young. She's
I can't describe it to you. She's everything. We approach life the same. We see people the same ways. We like the same people. If we go to a party or something, and we get a feeling about somebody, when we later on compare notes, it's amazing how we feel the same about people. And of course, you know, she's an adventurer. I mean, this kid went to India, went to Israel, went to Costa Rica. You know, my heart is always in my mouth. But and she says that I'm exaggerate because I have to worry. But I do remember saying to my mother, "Ma, you're so exaggerate." Yeah, but I don't tell her. You know, she's, yeah, we have a very similar relationship, absolutely. She's my breath of fresh air. She really is. She's a funny kid.
Hi.
She's not a kid, but to me, she'll always be a kid.
Hi, I'm Cindy.
Okay, Cindy.
You said you lost your mother at a very young age. How did you lose her?
She had a stroke.
This was while you were still in Italy?
Oh, yeah, in Italy. She died in 1966. She was 3 weeks shy of her 65th birthday. She had all her life, a very high blood pressure. But a wonderful mother she was not a good patient. After she died, I opened the drawer. There was a drawer filled with blood pressure medication open that she didn't take. I went through anger, guilt. Anger, how could you do this to me? Guilt, why didn't I convince her? And then acceptance, because you really, you know what they say, you can take the horse to the water, but you can't make it drink. She was a bad patient. And
can you describe the armistice, the day that the war was over?
Well, it was not the armistice. The war wasn't over with the armistice. The armistice was signed 8 December 1943. The war became over when finally the Sixth Army arrived north. See, the Sixth Army came from the sea and tried to go in the center of the country, in Anzio. I don't know if you heard. There was a famous church down there. It's a historical thing. But the Americans arrived from the sea, and the Germans, it was a child play to kill. So many young men died in that. Finally, they were able there was a young, underground that threw a grenade, killed those Germans, and the Americans arrived in Anzio. And then they came up north. They arrived in Rome, June 1944. They didn't arrive in Bologna until April 1945. That's why my mother's brother, they were hiding in the south. They came up Rome in June 1944 when they liberated. My mother and her brother never contacted during the time because they were afraid that my mother would be found. We had crossed the so-called Gothic line, how Donesmi. We arrived and we stayed in the building that was ours. Then the fascists were living downstairs. They knew whom we were. They knew who we were. And they never said anything. And then, oh no, at that point they knew. The Italians didn't care. They knew, and they hated the Germans, certainly much more than they didn't really hate us. They didn't even understand us. They hated the Germans. The Germans killed so many Italians. In those days, the German had passed an ordinance. For every German that is killed, you will kill 10 Italians. And there was a town near Bologna, because we lived in the north, called Marzabotto, where they took it's a little town. They took every citizen of Marzabotto. They took the grandfather, the children
of the, you know, the grandfather, the wives, the grandchildren, and they started by killing the grandchildren, the children, and the parents, and all in the city of Marzabotto. They killed so that the grandfather would be the last one to see. And then he was put in jail. This it was a Gestapo guy. I can't think of his name. And he died recently in a jail in Italy. And one day, he asked the Italian government for if he could go visit his mother, who was 90 years old and was dying in Germany. And the president of Italy said, "Not me. The citizens of Marzabotto have to forgive you. I'm not." And he should have thought about your mother before. And the citizens of Marzabotto, who are the descendant of that, says, "The hell with you. You're going to die in jail." And he died in jail and was never liberated. So no, we stayed there, and then April of 1945, and this may be a story to say, the 25th of April 1945, the American army arrived in Bologna. I was 4.5 years old, and everybody was running. They're here, they're here. And my mother said, "Don't move." The Germans were right there running. The Germans were here. The lieutenant was down there. They were chasing the Germans out. Bologna was a very important city because it's an important railway station. So the Americans were bombing to cut the German supply. The Germans were bombing to cut the Americans from coming. And there was a deposit of weaponry. It was an arsenal that the Germans had, so the Americans were bombing the arsenal. I mean, guess who was under all this? So my mother said, "Don't move." But of course, I was like Danielle when she was little. Never listen. And so I ran. And the German took me and stopped me. And everybody was freezing. Very freezed. The American lieutenant that was right there, of course I was little, the American lieutenant was tall, and above me shot the head of this German. I saw his brain splashed on the ground. Then I ran out, my mother grabbed me, and I remember that she said, "I didn't know whether to smack you or to hug you, because you didn't listen." She chose the latter, so, you know. But to this day, I do remember this German guy. And that lieutenant stayed in my mother's house, and he's at a camp for 1 week. And I do remember one thing about it that my mother told me later on. We always had a little bottle of oil, a little piece of butter, a little canister of flour. Everything was little. So when the German used to come in and ask for supply, my mother said, "That's all we have." Then the lieutenant came, and we had oil, wine, butter, and everything goes out. I said, "Where did you get this stuff?" My mother said there was an underground supply place that my mother never told me because, you know, God forbid, tell a child, open my mouth. It came later. And we had a feast. And he stayed a week. That's when my mother gave those dog tags to him. Oh, I didn't tell you the story. Right before we escaped to the countryside, there was bombing, needless to say. I told you it was a railway center. So there was the Americans had a way of bombing. It used to be called carpet bombing. In other words, you bomb so much that you can't miss the target. And my mother was crossing the bridge over the railway station, and because we had underground, they told us that the bombing, Americans used to let the underground know that they were bombing. And I was in a nursery school, and my mother ran to pick me up. There were two buildings, big building, and a little nursery school. The two buildings fell, the nursery school remained. I don't know, I guess God was looking down upon me. At any rate, as she crossed the border, one soldier, American soldier, bailed out, but he was dead. You know, he fell off the plane and he on the bridge. And my mother saw this young man that she almost tripped on it, and he had a T-shirt open, I don't know. And my mother saw he had a Jewish star on his neck. So she stopped. Quickly, she said that she had to say a Kaddish for a few seconds. And then there were dog tags, which my mother didn't know what they were, but made sense to her. So she took the star and the tags, and she put it in her pocket. And she said, if I'm alive after the war, somebody must know what they mean. And she kept it all her life, all these years. She had it with her in Switzerland. Then this lieutenant came, and through interpreter, my mother said, I took this out of a dead soldier that I know was America. Do they have any meaning for you? And of course the guard said, oh my God, that's how we know the names of the soldiers, through the dog tag. She didn't know they were called dog tags. And it was this young soldier from Chicago. They found the parents, and they came to Italy. And I do remember this American family coming, and they visited us. And, you know, they were thankful. They lost the child, but at least, she says, I closed his eyes, she said. That was my mother.
And did you keep up with the American lieutenant?
For a while, and then I think they moved away, and then they passed away, because again, we're talking about 60 years ago. So, and
when you got to America, did you know how to speak English?
Yes.
How did you learn how to speak English?
In England. I went to England. I knew how to speak English.
When you got there, was it difficult to learn the language?
I don't know. I have something for languages. I can pick up fast.
When you got here, where did you live?
With my mother-in-law in Brooklyn.
And what did you do to make money for a living?
Nothing. No. I was pregnant with my older child. I lived with my mother-in-law. She supplied room and board. My husband was in medical school. He didn't come. He had to finish medical school. I was pregnant, and they had all kinds of strikes in Italy, so my husband says, you got to go home and stay there, make sure you are taken care, because I was pregnant of my older child. He came 9 months later.
Did people in the U.S. treat you differently because they knew you went through the war?
No, they didn't treat me different. The most educated one were very curious, and he asked me all kinds of questions like you do. Some other, they just, you know, I spoke the language, so I made it easy on them. Because in those days, I said some people had a little bit of xenophobia, so they felt that maybe, but because I spoke the language well, they kind of relaxed. My mother-in-law was a nice lady. She died at 90, so.
In the U.S., did you have any friends who were survivors, or did you meet any other survivors?
I have a friend who was married to a survivor. He passed on. I have a very close friend. Actually, she's also a colleague of mine. Her husband was 14 years old when the American liberated the camps. He was in concentration camp. He was 14, he was German. He was born in Germany. And he found his mother when he went to the DP, the dispersed people. He found his mother, they lived in his mother eventually died here in this country. And she's a very close friend of mine. She taught with me. She still teaches there. I don't remember having any other. I might have met people, you know, at the temple where I live. But no personal friends. I don't remember having any friends. I moved to Staten Island where there was a new community,
Originally in Staten Island, they had 3.5 Jews, so. But then all the influx from Brooklyn.
Okay, we're just gonna switch. Oh, okay. Okay. We know that Italy allied with the Germans. How do you feel, like in the beginning of the war, how do you feel about the educated people and like the Gentiles that live there turning their backs against the Jews?
In those days, I wouldn't say turn their back. The fascists were a sizable minority, but a minority nonetheless. The majority of Italians didn't think that was a good idea. They never liked the Germans. The Germans don't like them. So it was a pact that Hitler never trusted Mussolini. Well, let me just give you an example. My father wrote a column for Il Corriere della Sera, which is what here is the New York Times. And he made fun of the fascism. And Mussolini, and he knew Mussolini. This is before, the Germans. And one day Mussolini said to him, fascism is not a funny thing, you make fun. He says, okay, let's make it clear, you made this joke, not me. So Mussolini was not one of the brightest people in this war. He couldn't even save his son-in-law. There are tons of movies that make fun of the fascism. You can't make fun of the Nazi. There's nothing funny about them. The majority of Italians went by their business, and a lot of them hid the Jews, help us move out, etc. But they were fascism. I mean, if you ask the Greek, they hate him because the fascists went to Greece and they killed a lot of people. So let's not be romantic about it. But there was down south, there was a camp where the people were kept there. But they were given good food. They were, they were kept like in a summer camp. You have to understand Italy really to understand how it was. The Italians are not very politically minded. They don't care much about the government. That's why to this day they can't keep a government straight more than a week.
And how is it different now in Italy than you remember?
Well, it's different because of the political climate war-wise. There is you have to understand that the Italians import 100% of their oil. So the people are pro-Arabs. Let's not kid ourselves. There is an anti-Israel and anti-American, which becomes anti-Semitism. They threw a bomb in the temple. I'm trying to think how many years ago. My cousin is 36. He was 14, 15. As a matter of fact, my cousin was safe because she had a headache. It was Yom Kippur. And she was sitting there. She always stayed there all the time, but she said to her daughter, I have a headache, I'm going home. And she left the temple. This chair where she is was full of shrapnel. So, and I remember this was during for her 50th anniversary, going there and seeing the guards with the Uzi. And I went, they redid the vows, my cousin, so I was so happy because I had a movie camera with me to take a movie of them. And it was Sunday. I was happy it was Sunday because if it was Shabbos, I couldn't have taken. And the guy stopped and he says, you're not taking that camera in. So the rabbi came and he says, I can guarantee this girl, I know her since she was a young girl. And the guy said, well, if you do, Rabbi, you better sign here. Because they were afraid. Now there is metal metal security to come through. I mean, it's not what it used to be. Because the political climate, I mean, there are a lot of North African Muslims that live in there. Now, the Italians, by and large, don't like me. Make no mistake about it. But the Pope forgave the guy who tried to shoot him. So.
When did you begin telling your story?
For many years I didn't. Then I had a friend. One day he asked me, this was 1980, and he said to me, you never told me your story. And we were very close friends, and I said, gee, you're right. I didn't want to, because for a long time, when my mother was alive, it was very difficult for her. She didn't want to hear it. And she didn't want to talk about it. I mean, I read the letters that my father wrote to my mother. It was a love affair. It was, and to have lost her husband for her was so difficult that she didn't want to talk about it. She was a young woman when she had me. I mean, she was 39 years old when she got pregnant, and she never wanted to remarry. I remember my mother dating. That was it. She was a one-man woman, so she didn't want to talk, I didn't want to talk. So I think it was 1980, a friend of mine just started to tell me, why don't you want to say something? That's when I started to tell my story. Okay. But my husband always says that my daughter should write a book or make a movie. I don't know, one day. You know something funny? I have that skirt.
Do you still have, from the Finzi Contini family, they're still living in?
No, there are none there.
They're nothing?
No. Oh, and they didn't even mention, no. My mother, I remember that garden. My mother, of course.
From the movie.
Tova. 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 I should start from here?
The way we pronounce the Hebrew, yes. We would call you Tova.
Do you hear?
Yeah.
Like we say Kippur, we say Purim, we say Hanukkah, which is the way they do it in Israel.
Yeah, it's the more Sephardi pronunciation.
Yeah, but it's not Sephardic. The Israeli use that. Right, and you say Purim. I think that this comes from Eastern Europe.
Yes, right. The German, the Yiddish.
And the vernaculum has a mixture of Hebrew and words that I remember. For instance, when the kids were bad, my mother used to say, "Oh, what a manzer." The people that were bad, they call it manzerim, and you know.
Do you know any Hebrew? Did you learn any Hebrew?
I did. I can't remember anymore.
Did you learn how to read Hebrew, though, for the siddur?
Yeah, I remember. I learned to read it now. It's been so long, I mean, since I was bat mitzvah, I mean, a few years ago. I don't know, but my kids know how to read it so well. They can't understand it. I was surprised, what was it, last Pesach. My daughter said, okay, you're the youngest one, you have to say the 3 questions. And she said, oh, Ma. I said, read it. And I was surprised. My God, I said, this kid still read Hebrew so well. And when she was studied for her bat mitzvah, she drove the cantor to drink because she would skip one day, Saturday morning. And the cantor says, where is she? I said, my God, they called me on Shabbos. That's what you did to him. And but then she sang the entire Friday service. And she questioned everything the rabbi told. Oh, Danielle was
the rabbi said, she drove me to drink. But anyway.
What is your message? Oh, hi, I'm Hoodie. Nice to meet you.
Hi, Hoodie.
What is your message to my generation?
Study history. Don't forget what happened. Because I really believe what Churchill said. Those who forget history, they're bound to repeat it. Don't say it'll never happen to us. Just stay vigilant.
What can we do to combat Holocaust denial?
Well, there are so many proof. For instance, there are films that they came from archive in London that Eisenhower ordered them to take, because Eisenhower said, and they came around the internet, you can find them, that Eisenhower said, take a movie, he said, because one day some son of a bitch will say that it didn't happen. These were his words, not mine. It was prophetic, right? You know, it is, you know, we got, what's his name? I call him Amananina Najjob, whatever his name is. You can pronounce his name, congratulations. I call him Hamananina Najjob, because he's a nut job. And I have a colleague who is an Iranian Jew. He escaped when he was 12 years old, and he tells me the stories. That is frightening to hear.
Do you have any photos to show us?
No.
No. Okay.
And you know why? Because they were lost on crossing Switzerland. I have photos of my childhood. I don't have them here. I had photos of my childhood, but they were all, I have one photo of me during the war. But everything else is afterwards. We didn't.
Were you able to take anything with you to Switzerland, or you lost everything?
I think my mother took these photos, they were lost, and then clothes and food. Whatever came back is that famous diamond that came back, and I don't have it on today, but yes, that's all that is left. So we try to reconstruct our life later on.
What do you think about Israel playing a role in the survival of the Jewish people?
Oh, I think that the way, especially the way they were, I think that the Israelis were more, years ago, they really believed that some young people, because they're so young, they don't know the history anymore. But one day I was talking to my daughter, and I said, you know, make no mistake about it. If they could wipe Israel, we wouldn't be safe either here. If they could do that. Well, right now, yesterday, what happened at the UN is frightening. It is really frightening because, well, of course, the majority of the people at the UN are Arab countries. Then, I mean, they replaced the human rights member from the United States, they replaced it with Chinese. I mean, you put the cat in charge of the cheese. I mean, really, it is just, the world doesn't make much sense, but we got to keep on fighting.
Do you have any other stories to tell us?
Other stories of the past. Oh, what he was saying to me, that there is a movie that I don't know if you saw the movie. It's called The Garden of Finzi-Contini. That was, I don't know if you saw the movie, but there is a young couple in this movie. They fall in love, and they play in this garden, which really existed. And the writer of this movie was a friend of my mother. And the grandfather in the movie was my maternal grandmother's brother. So my maternal grandmother was a Finzi-Contini. And these people, the movie ends with them. We know that they ended up in concentration camp. None of them survived. But I think that some of the young people that weren't there, the day that they brought them to concentration. Did you ever see the movie?
I didn't see the movie. I heard about it, though.
Oh, it's a magnificent movie, and he ends with the song, the Rachamin, and then it ends the music. It's a magnificent movie. It's sad, but it gives you a sense of life was in Ferrara, which is the town where my mother was born. That's my mother's side of the family. And if you have a chance, watch the movie.
Most definitely.
I pledge to you, I will watch it with the four of them.
Okay.
Throughout the war, how did you keep your faith in God?
I was too young to think about it. But my mother, but I can tell you one thing. My mother used to talk to God like he was his next door neighbor. She used to say, sometime, I remember my mother saying, God, I know you're busy, but when you get a chance, can you look down because there is really a mess here. She was, I don't remember how, but I'm not that I don't remember, I can explain. She was, I have little tidbits. I remember, for instance, and I was very little, I don't know if you know that the news came out when the Americans arrived that Hitler had killed himself. And my mother said, that I translated only because she said in Italian, oh, may we have peace until he comes back. She had a sense of humor. But, and she was a very wise lady. But as I said, I think she had a faith in God because she used to ask for help. And as I said, it was like his next door neighbor. She talked to him like, you know. And I remember going to shul for the holiday. I remember the first time we went, the first holiday after we came back. And I was a little girl, and the people around, you know, they hadn't seen each other because everybody was in hiding. And I remember people said, oh my God, you're alive. And then they never, and then they said, I heard you had a child. And then the people, you know, a little Dre, you said. And then they were, oh my God, what a pretty little girl. And I, you know, and I used to, and I remember saying to my mother, could they stop pinching my cheeks? And this was 1946. I was 5 years old. And I remember, but what I remember the most, because you say faith in God, finally they liberated Bologna, and we were able to go to Rome where my mother could see her brother again. They were very close, and I owe him so much because that's why I say I was spoiled. I was the youngest one of all of the cousins because I was born after 14 years of marriage. For some reason they tried, so they couldn't. And my mother was the youngest of 6 children. So my youngest cousin when I was born was 17 years old. So I was this little girl that I don't think I sat at the table on my own until I was about 7 years old. I was always on somebody's lap. So we took the train and went to Rome because my mother had to show the child that she had had. And I remember, oh my God. And it says, and I do remember my mother's sentence that he said, how did we make it? And I remember my mother answers, Baruch Hamash, she said. And these people around it, I didn't know. I didn't know it was my uncle, I didn't know it was my cousin, but I learned fast. I learned fast because I felt loved. So in spite of all, I had this choral childhood with everybody around. They were happy to be alive. That's all they were.
If you could speak to your parents today, what would you tell them?
Thank you. They were wonderful parents. I mean, one I had it for 1 year, and my mother, thank you for all that they did. I wish she lived longer. I wish she took the medication for blood pressure, but, you know, my father-in-law died at 57 years old. He was a diabetic. He didn't take the medication, and he ate everything that he wasn't supposed to eat. So my husband and I joke. My father-in-law knew that we were engaged, but he never got to meet me. My mother knew my husband very well for 3 years.
And we joke and say, you know, my mom, my husband says, my dad and your mom, they met up there in the bed patient department because they were both bed patient. And he was a wonderful guy, but he died at 57 years old in 2 minutes. He never did what he was supposed to do. The doctor used to chase him. So I don't know why all the people in those days, they didn't pay attention.
Did the war influence you into becoming a biologist?
No.
No. So why did you choose that profession over political science?
When I was a political science man, and when my daughter finally went to school all day, my younger one, that she was there until 4:30 because she went to the Jewish Community Center nursery school. I decided that I was going to take some classes and for fun. And I took a biology class, and I met a guy. I still remember the name, Dr. Silverstein. It inspired me. And I said to my husband, and then I went to graduate school for political science at Rutgers University. And I came home one day and I said to my husband, I took a couple of classes in biology. And I said to my husband, I'm going to go into biology. And my husband says, you crazy? I said, no, I want to do it. He taught biology. And he inspired me. So I went back to undergraduate to take some of the classes that I needed, chemistry, organic chemistry. I did it in 2 years. And then I went to Rutgers, to graduate school. My husband supported me a great deal, psychologically and financially, because otherwise I couldn't have done it. And he's always been my greatest fan.
Does your study of biology deepen your appreciation of God's natural world?
Are you asking me if I believe in evolution?
No. When you study biology, does that give you more?
Yeah, appreciation of nature, absolutely. But yes, but we have nothing against evolution. The last thing I knew, I don't think Jews are against evolution. At least I hope not. Yeah, I believe in evolution. And I always say, the evolution doesn't deny God. It just denies that we started this way. I said, I'm sure he started a whole ball of wax, but how we started and how we became, you know, are only the fundamentalists, like guys like Romney, who doesn't believe in evolution, or Ryan, who doesn't believe in evolution. But no, I appreciate nature immensely. I think it's so beautiful. And I think we're destroying nature by you know, not taking care of carbon dioxide. We punch a hole in the ozone layer, so we have skin cancer, the ocean rises. I mean, Sandy is a taste of what to come, unfortunately. So, anyway, go ahead.
Professor Bieber, thank you so much.
Oh, you can call me Carla.
Carla.
Makes me feel
so much.
You're quite welcome.
The girls
What is that sound that I hear every so often?
The bell?
The bell for classes. For the
Oh.
It's not a university, it's a high school.
Oh, you have to go to class. Right.
The ladies have a gift.
Oh, please.
So I'll let them.
See, you asked me, I mean, my daughter now, I go home, I have to meet Danielle for lunch. She's coming to visit us. So every so often.
I'd also like to take a group picture with you.
Thank you. She lives in Brooklyn.
By the way, the gift
Ooh, I knew I was taking.
The gift is critically acclaimed.
Yeah, this one, I think you'll enjoy. You're a reader. This is
Yes, I'm a reader.
Lau's book.
Do you want me to do it?
Please.
What the hell? Oh, here.
Thank you. Ooh. This is Rabbi Lau's book.
I heard about that
The book is amazing.
Thank you. It'll be now the semester is over in 1 week. I can't wait for the end. Well, I can't wait for the For one reason, the surgeon didn't let me go back teaching for a month. So school started the 10th of September. I didn't go back until the 10th of October. So college were covering for me, and I was trying to catch up, and I was really working. Oh, it was insane. Then Sandy came along, so we missed a week, and oh my God, this has been so hard. The semester, I want to forget about it. So I can't wait, and I don't teach in the winter. I don't need to teach.
Okay, so you'll have something to read
Right,
and enjoy.
right. In the plane, I'm going to Italy.
I'm going to Italy.
Yeah.
And this, you can read the articles before
Yes.
you go to Italy. You can put this
So you can,
inside as
I
well.
wonder if it can go in.
Right? No, it'll go in.
Yeah, he'll go in. Thank you so much.
We want to get a group picture, but we need Rabbi Meir, so we'll have to wait 1 second. No, we want to get the thank you note.
How do you call this part of Queens?
Holliswood.
Who?
Holliswood. Where we are right now is Holliswood.
Never heard of it. You know, it's
right
amazing.
near Georgia Jamaica Estates is.
Does he need to be in the picture?
I still don't know what you're talking about.
That's
The only
exactly
part of Queens I know is where Queens College is.
Kew Garden, Kew Garden Hills.
No, that's Flushing.
No, but Kew Garden Hills is literally it's right there.
Oh.
But I
Bueno.
walked to it.
I used to take the Van Wyck Expressway, and in those days they were pothole. The pothole had pothole, and I lost 11 hubcaps. You don't remember hubcaps in cars because you're too young. And at any rate, and I used to get out after exit 9. There is an exit that it's the Long Island Expressway. But then I took the first one along the cemetery. So a friend of mine told me how to go to Queens College the first time I had to go. And he says to me, then you get out and you go along the Jewish cemetery and then you make a right, I think it's Main Street.
Yeah.
Right, because I was going
That's
in a
Karen
little
Hills right
street,
there,
because I was going to the science building. Okay. So I'm getting out, it's the first day, and I'm going out, and I see that there is a cemetery, and then I said, I hope it's the right cemetery. So I pull closer, and as I'm driving, I'm reading tombstones. Goldberg, Cask, Guns. I said, oh, I'm in the right cemetery. And so, and so that's how I found, but that's the only street I knew. So I used to say, if they detour me, I'm lost in Queens forever, because I don't know Queens from Adam. But I spent 2 years there.
Okay, Carla, we're going to get a good picture. You're going to be
Actually,
the
can I borrow
center.
your phone for a second? Sure. So I'll call the driver.
Center of defense.
Two of you on each side.
I can't read the exact
She already a budding filmmaker. She knows you can put same color. Same color of whom?
We're wearing the same thing.
Well, it's a little different, but it's
People ask
okay.
Okay, we get to switch together, and Rabbi Meir,
I'm
join
coming,
the
I'm coming. I
females.
know I'm holding you up. I'm sorry.
That's right, you are. Wait, let's put this down.
I had called you before because the guy didn't know where to go. That's why I left a message on your cell phone. The guy says, where you going? I said, well, don't you know? He says, no. He said, he called his dispatch. She says, but they didn't tell me anything. I said, that's intelligent.
Okay, everybody squish together.
Squish.
I'm fine, I have a different
Say
one.
cheese.
And cheese. And I'm gonna take a second one just in case. And cheese.
Wait a minute, Mike.
You want
Hold
another
on,
one?
Nobody moves.
I'll always get your shot.
Alright, camera. And smile. I wanna take a second one. And smile. Thank you.
Okay, thank you
Very
so
much.
much.
When you're getting married, your face.
Yeah.
Alright, I'll cut this.
Those little cameras are